Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this session on the future of Microsoft BizTalk Server and the roadmap that we're going to share today. My name is Sriram. I just go by my last name, Sriram. I'm a product unit manager for the BizTalk Server product in Microsoft. So before we get into the product, I want to kind of get a little show of hands. Since we have in PDC a set of people who use the product and those who are kind of new to it. So we'll show of hands, how many people have used BizTalk Server before? Oh, cool. This is actually very useful because I can actually target this to be more about the details of what we are trying to build, not kind of bring everybody up to speed. So thank you. And thank you for using BizTalk. So who uses BizTalk Server today other than you folks, right? I had a kind of a mini pop quiz set up, so I wanted to, some of these answers you probably might have gotten in the previous sessions, but I wanted to ask anyway. So how many enterprise customers today use BizTalk Server and bet their mission-critical business apps on BizTalk Server? Any guesses? 10? 100? 10,000, yes, 10,000. Over 10,000 enterprise customers using BizTalk Server in mission-critical applications. Huge. It's much bigger than the competition, but we will not talk about that today. So, how many European Union governments use BizTalk Server in their businesses? Overall, how many European Union governments are there? There are 27 of them. How many use BizTalk Server? 23. Okay, somebody said 15. Close, but not close enough. 23. Okay, so how many of the Fortune Global 100s use BizTalk Server? Over 80%, right? So, no, I already gave out the answer, so I don't want to go through the list of this. So I just display it out there. You can read it yourself, but the key takeaway is BizTalk is used currently, today, as before we discuss the roadmap of where we are going, today in several mission-critical applications in all kinds of verticals. You can look at it there: railroad, insurance, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications. So the top echelons of each of these industries use BizTalk Server in their mission-critical applications. They also use it across geographies. Most of the statistics here is US, but we actually have usage of BizTalk across all the geographies. We have a very, very strong presence in Europe. I was just talking to somebody who came from EMEA, and there are lots of excited, passionate customers and partners there. So just to bring you up to speed on what we've been doing with BizTalk, the session today, I want the key takeaway for you to be BizTalk is Microsoft's integration server. We are continuing to invest in integration and the enterprise critical aspects of it, and we are continuing to evolve it and extend this so that it can actually take utilize all the power of the app fabric that you heard about today morning, right? So I'll talk in detail about what BizTalk brings to app fabric and what app fabric brings to BizTalk customer scenarios. Okay. So the agenda, I'll start with how BizTalk fits in the app fabric stack or the Microsoft application server stack. I will skim through the intro and recap, since most of you actually already have used BizTalk, and then quickly delve into what's ahead. And I layer this as a roadmap that we build as we go. So I'll talk about what we have done so far, what's coming up in the next year or so, and then what are we thinking about the future beyond that. Right? We do have a couple of very interesting demos, and then finally we'll close with the roadmap and have some time for questions and answers. This is Microsoft's application server stack, very close to what you saw in the morning in Bob Moglia's session today morning, and in Anil Nouri's talk about the app server current and future. So if you look at our stack today, the way we think about it is in terms of layers, right? This is not an architectural layering, but it's layers in terms of functionality, right? At the bottom, you have the operating system and the ability to manage this using systems management, System Center. Then you have the database layer, which is providing the data services for the application that you want to build. Now, we also believe that for each of this, there is an on-prem version that supports the kind of apps that we're used to today, and a services or a cloud version that will support the future set of apps. Now, in Microsoft, we also strongly believe, and several of our BizTalk customers know this, that there is actually not one or the other. It's both. You have a B2B app, you're going to run something on-premise, you're going to run something in the cloud. Today it might be a proprietary network, but tomorrow it might be the cloud. So it's not one versus the other, it's both together, right? So on top of the database layer, you see the application services stack, which is what you heard about today, which is the Windows Server App Fabric, which provides functionality such as caching and workflow. And the similar sort of a complementary of that is the Windows Azure Platform Services on the App Fabric on the cloud. And we have a common programming model, .NET, and the folks such as you build on top of Workflow, Windows Workflow Foundation, and Windows Communication Foundation. Visual Studio and the broad panoply of tools that Visual Studio brings is what people use to develop these apps and debug them. And finally, there are certain workloads. Like clearly, Dynamics is one of the apps or the business apps that you build. SharePoint is like a portal workload, and BizTalk is an integration workload that's built on top of this. It's an integral part of the stack, right? What does BizTalk Server do? I'll quickly skim through this. At the end of the day, what BizTalk does is helps people build applications that integrate. Right? Every enterprise today has a large set of heterogeneous systems. These heterogeneous systems have different formats, different transports, different protocols, and many of them are probably not even in the enterprise. What a product such as BizTalk does is actually bring them together. So people actually can connect to them, build integration applications faster, and manage them in a centralized fashion. So on the left side, you see things such as the line of business systems like Oracle and SAP. You see mainframe systems and portals such as SharePoint Server that you can use to connect to BizTalk. And on the right side, you actually see B2B or business-to-business standards for specific verticals. HL7 is for healthcare, Swift is for financials, EDI is for manufacturing and supply chain, and RFID is for devices. It's also used for supply chain management, in a sense. Right? So what BizTalk does is that it's one centralized server and an entire application lifecycle that you can manage for your integration solution, all the way from development, deployment, debugging, and management. Right? And to also be able to scale it. Right? That's the purpose of sort of BizTalk Server. So before we get into the roadmap, I want to talk about where we are today. It's a kind of a short recap. We've been in this business for close to a decade right now. The BizTalk Server 2000 shipped, I think, roughly around the end of '99. Right? So we've been roughly 10 years, over 10,000 customers. We are in our sixth release. BizTalk Server 2009 that shipped this year in March is the sixth release of the product. We've been constantly innovating and upgrading the product. Every 18 to 24 months, we've been coming out with a new release with a set of feature asks from customers as well as responding to the market challenges. We've got to be agile, right? So what is in the market today is BizTalk Server 2009, which was shipped in March last year. And the key innovations in there are specifically the new adapters for Oracle e-business suites, an enhanced SQL adapter, and a revamp of the previous set of line of business adapters to actually support the versions of new versions of the LOB systems, EDI enhancements so that EDI is actually kind of part of the product right now, and key enhancements in the electronic data interchange technologies, and an ESB toolkit, an enterprise service bus toolkit, or an upgrade of that to 2.0. There is a lot of interest in this particular technology, and there is a talk right after this. And you folks should go to that. Right? Syed is giving the talk. I also wanted to talk about, being in the enterprise is not just about, enterprise space is not just about kind of moving on to the next new innovation and going forward. It's about supporting the current set of customers. As part of that, we have also released the beta of BizTalk Server 2006 R2, the previous version, SP1, like the software patch for that. The beta has been available for public download, and we are looking for feedback. It actually has a set of key enhancements around key bug fixes, improvements in meeting the new set of standards, specifically in HL7, and certain features, certain manageability improvements. We've also improved the install of SP1 itself, so you can actually have a unified install, which is sort of new, right? Oops. Before we go back, go to the next one. So as this is sort of, I wanted to begin this by building out this roadmap. You see blanks to the middle and the right of this slide, and it's intentional. As we go through the talk, I want to fill these pieces with the kind of things that we want to build, right? And I'll talk about the kind of things that we are committing to and the kind of things that we are exploring, right? So obviously, the ones that are going to be in the middle bucket, what we are doing next year, I'll be talking about those that we are fairly sure that we're going to get done, right? So that you can start making some plans around it. But then the ones beyond that, I will talk about it in terms of, here's how our thinking is. I'll show you some prototypes, and I'll talk about how we align. So to start with that, I also, before we go to the next slide, I also want to kind of take this time to talk about some of the technology disruptions that are going on in the market, right? You've already, if you went to Anil's talk, you would have heard about the fact that the resources are getting cheaper, not human resources, but resources in terms of processing power, storage, networking, they're getting very cheap, much more accessible. Cloud is here, right, in terms of, not in terms of real enterprise usage right now, but it's clearly becoming a technology that's viable, that's a lot more cost competitive. So we have to make sure that our products and integration services actually evolve into that space as well. Virtualization, another key factor. In almost all enterprise deployments, now you see lots of virtualizations because it's virtualized machines because it's easier to manage, right? So there are a set of technology trends that will affect how we think about the evolution of the product. That said, there is also key customer asks. So we got to look at that, as well as we also look at what are the kind of asks that customers have for who are currently using the product. So I have a list of these. No particular order, but high in terms of the kind of things that we often hear from customers. At a high level, there are three big buckets. One's around platform support, which is I got my latest version of Visual Studio 2010. I want to load my BizTalk project in it, and I don't want to run side by side. Those are classic kinds of things. Or my enterprise or firm decided to standardize on the latest version of Windows Server 2008 R2, and what's your story for supporting that? Or leveraging some of the features from there. Same for SQL Server. So these are very common asks, right? We have had a strong kind of push to say, what's your story with Windows Workflow? Now, that's a euphemistic way of saying, when do you start supporting it? It's not just a story. It's about how do you actually take a workflow, and there are lots of innovations in workflow. Those who've gone to the Bob Muglia's talk would know that there is a new way of actually visualizing it. The tool inside Visual Studio has lots of features that are very useful in terms of zoom, in terms of flowchart paradigm for looking at looking at your workflows, or a state machine way of looking at it. Those are features that BizTalk and integration developers would love to have, right? So we've been getting requests on that. Folks have also wanted a common application model, which is, BizTalk's great in terms of you can build your application, you can deploy it, you can manage it, but I want to be able to do the same with .NET apps that I already have. So sort of scaling up your .NET apps into an integration application, right? And one of the long-standing asks is ability to make transformation easy to use, not just for simple schemas, but real-world schemas, right? And I'll show some examples of this today. So those who've done lots of transformations know that you spend a lot of time in building these maps, right? Trading partner management is another key ask. Ability to manage, we, Microsoft ourselves, have about 20,000 partners, and we use BizTalk to manage them. And it's difficult to actually get scale, right? So some of these kinds of features that people absolutely need. More out-of-box connectivity. Like we have out-of-box connectivity for RFID, and certain adapters, but we need more adapters, right? So this is a fairly long tail. We will have to be very careful in terms of how we pick that right set, but there is always an ask for a few more adapters. Finally, we shouldn't forget that this is a product in the enterprise space. So you do all this, but you don't do the enterprise capabilities, it's not going to be very useful, right? So we have to ensure that it's a product that scales in terms of scale out. It's a product that you can manage in scale, and it's a product that you can actually write to in a sort of loosely coupled fashion, right? That's where I think the enterprise service bus comes in. So you are able to do the real world SOA, where you can write your applications in a fashion that is, that's agnostic of the other kind of things that you're utilizing. But at the same time, you can stitch these together into a nice application that you can manage, right? So, of course, those who've been using BizTalk also know the, common request that comes in terms of I want to be able to. It's great to have durable messaging, but I also want to have low latency messaging, even if the guarantees are lower, right? Because there are certain scenarios, and I'll talk about a couple of those, where that is very useful. So these are sort of there's a really long list. There are team managers, but this is sort of the themes around the kind of things that we hear from customers. This also sort of resonates with the sort of previous technology disruptors that I talked about, because with the cloud, with the notion of connecting these integration applications to the web, you actually need faster response time. You need bigger scale. You need the ability to manage these things. So they sort of go hand in hand. With that, I want to re-announce, because Anil stole my thunder and he announced, re-announce BizTalk Server 2009 R2, which is the release that we will be delivering over the next year, 2010. And I will talk about the set of features that we are focusing on in there. So first and foremost, it is a part of the Microsoft's App Fabric 2010 wave. So you heard about the .NET 4, you heard about App Fabric, and this is, in conjunction with that overall stack, we want to make sure that BizTalk has a set of key features that moves us forward in the right direction, both in meeting customer requests as well as in aligning with the, the technology movements overall, right? First and foremost, platform support. We want to make sure that you can actually develop your applications in Visual Studio 2010. You can deploy it on Windows Server 2008 R2, and you can have SQL Server 2008 R2 and use all the wonderful features in there in terms of BI for your BAM, for instance, and use it for message box as well. So I presume most folks here know what message box and BTM on all those databases that we use are. Secondly, we want to make sure that it's easier to build application and enterprise integration applications very quickly. How do you make and to manage them as well? So how do you make it happen? So today, if you actually look at the manage or the performance tuning of BizTalk, there are lots of knobs. Actually, folks such as you probably tune it very well and get it to ship shape in your enterprise. But one of the key problems that you run into is when you have a farm of BizTalk servers, you want to be able to manage them in a single dashboard. You want to look at all your performance counters and performance monitoring information in a single dashboard. So we're providing that with 2009 R2. Single page for your entire BizTalk group. Out-of-the-box support for certain RFID programming concepts. I'll describe what this means. Today, RFID devices emit. There could be mobile devices or fixed devices. They actually emit the reads, and they are consumed by BizTalk RFID, which is the RFID server. And RFID server processes it. It could be alerting, filtering, or transforming these events, and finally processes it and puts it in a sink, usually a SQL sink, right? But there isn't a client programming model for this. right? If you want to write a .NET app that just basically says, I want to consume this via WCF, it would be really cool, right? So what we are building is an out-of-box pipe all the way to the client so that you can actually make it easy. You can build these client applications really easy to read RFID events. Same for writing as well. PowerShell for common management tasks. Everybody knows the use of PowerShell because you can actually look at your receive ports, receive locations, configure them. You can start or stop a BizTalk application. You can manage, you can deploy an application. If you can do all of this from your command prompt, oh, that'll be very cool, right? So if you can take, so I want to rephrase. This is for common management tasks. This is the direction that we are moving in. We will cover all management tasks in the release after this, but we want to be sure that we actually get most of the pain out by making sure that you can actually, the most common tasks that you do are captured in PowerShell. Okay. We also have a SCOM, the System Center Object Model. We are revamping it, literally, to actually make sure that it reflects what people do today. So if you look at most BizTalk installations from what we have heard, you actually have two kinds of administrators. Those who administer the boxes and those who administer the applications. And they're never the same. I mean, smaller installations you might be the same, but usually the guy who owns the box is an ops person, and they have a different set of directives and goals with respect, as opposed to the guy who manages the application. If there is a failed message that did not route right, or a message that is not formatted right, the person who's actually the ops person can't deal with that, right? So we sort of came up with this notion of, okay, there is a deployment model or a topology persona, as opposed to a person who actually manages the BizTalk application itself. And the SCOM object model actually reflects that, right? We also want to make sure absolutely that what you see in the System Center Operations Manager is very close to what you see in the WMI. So you don't have to learn two different UI and have to keep mapping, right? So there's certain, and these are very crucial productivity improvements for people who are running BizTalk in production, right, for managing the applications. Then the third theme that we are focusing on is to actually make sure that it's easier to build applications, sort of focusing on the developer for B2B. So certain key enhancements in the mapper tool specifically around complex and large schema mapping. FTP secure to make sure that, and there are also certain certain enhancements to the current FTP provider adapter as well, and we are building an FTP secure adapter to make sure that people can do business-to-business transactions in a secure fashion using FTP. And as usual, we would update our B2B accelerators to keep up with the latest set of standards. This is the high-level themes, right? These are things that I'm talking about that we absolutely will deliver in this release. There are, as with any release, there are a bunch of things that wouldn't fit in this slide. So there are quite a few things that are smaller but still as useful in nature that are not part of this slide. This release would be available to you as part of the in the calendar year 2010 as part of the App Fabric 2010 wave. Now, I want to do a mini demo of the mapper. Before going to the mapper, I kind of want to get a little show of hands. I'm sure everybody who uses BizTalk has used mapper, but how many people have used what do you think is a large schema map or something that wouldn't fit in, one screen? Good. How many like it? The response I expected. It is still useful. Okay, so I want to kind of set the context for the mapper demo. I'm going to show you a map, which is something that we actually got from our MSIT, Microsoft IT, where we actually have lots of applications built on BizTalk. It is still useful to use the current mapper to build those because it's still way more better than writing your code yourself, right? That said, there are some significant usability challenges when it comes to large maps, right? And if you see many of these big BizTalk installations, they spend a lot of time trying to build these maps, right? And sometimes creating one map takes about 50 hours of work, So a significant portion of BizTalk development actually goes into transformation. Not surprising, because what's BizTalk about? BizTalk's about integration. Different formats, different protocols. I want to make it and normalize everything. So map is where a big part of what the product does is, right? So without much ado, I want to go into the demo. Is this the one? Okay. Okay. Nice. That's a map from, as I said, it's from Microsoft IT. On the left side, you see an SAP iDoc, and on the right side, you see the schema of EDIFACT 93, right? So what this does is it's actually an invoice processing, right? So it's an outbound pipeline. You're getting something from your SAP, backend, and translating that to an invoice that you need to send to your partner, right? The schema is fairly big. You can see that there are roughly around 250 nodes. I didn't count, but it's roughly around that. And this is the old map. This is the map that is there in the current product. As you see, there are lots of lines here, which is essentially all bunched together. This is kind of one of the better maps to show, in the sense I have seen maps where there's basically just a thick band of lines, right? Of course, you can click on one of these, and they probably will light up as blue, but you can barely see it. Okay, and there are lines going from from the functoids that are in the map pane to ones that are here, and there are lines going across, right? So there's a lot of clutter. So good. That's setting the stage. It's still a good mapper. Please continue to use it. We'll continue to improve it. And I want to kind of show where we are right now. Okay, same map, exactly the same map. Okay, I haven't done anything yet. All that it does is actually it reduces the clutter. So if you view the map, it paints all dark lines for all the objects that are inside the page. Like if both the ends of a line are within the page, then it paints it as dark. Otherwise, it grays it out. There are two kinds of gray lines. One that basically says nowhere to nowhere is like a dark gray line. Nowhere to somewhere, as in something that connects to a functoid in the page, but the other point is not in here. That's basically a dotted line. Great. Good improvement. I would like some applause if you like it. Thank you. Then you can just sort of go and say, I want to click this. Once you click on any particular element, automatically highlights the relationships that are associated with that particular element. So it could be on this side or this side, right? The other thing that you could do is instead of looking at this, I can actually say, show me only the partial or full links, right? So reduce all the clutter. Look at only the things that are on this page, right? Great. You could also say, hey, there are some things that are on this. Let's take this logical AND operator. It's connected to a bunch of things here. It's connected to a bunch of things that are, I don't know where they are. I could just, usually what map developers do is actually they just browse that line and get to that point. But instead, I could just click on that. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So this is a feature that we called auto scroll, right? And what it does is it ensures that you focus on what you're trying to look at. I could also choose to pick this and say move to page, because let's say I want to work only on this particular functoid, and I could say move it to a different page, right? I'm not going to move to the page, but you could just add a new page and move it to the page. And what it does is it takes this functoid and moves it to one of the other pages, right? So as you see, a set of maps elsewhere as well, right? So much for that. But let's say I want to view the map without actually building anything, right? I want to see, hey, what are all the things that are of interest in this page? I could actually go and say, look at the relevance tree. That will give me, it's basically what it did is on the source schema side, it collapsed everything to show only those nodes that are involved in the map. So if you actually, kind of interesting in the sense that even though you have 250 nodes, all the nodes that you're using sort of fit on a page in this side and sort of a little outside the page. If you had the resolution a little higher, it would probably fit inside the page, right? You could, of course, go in through and expand a particular area. And as I go through this, you can see that it actually auto-scrolls every time I type something. So that's good. Last but not least, I can actually go in and say, I am looking for, in the destination schema on the map. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So what I did is I just searched for the word loop. You can see multiple things here. You can see whatever is loop on this side getting highlighted on the destination schema. You can see the loops that are in the, as part of the functoid, loop functoids get highlighted, and you can just hit enter and go from one to the other. And as you go through it, it'll scroll as well, right? You also notice that in page 2 and 4, they're highlighted in blue, which means that there are some functoids or elements on source or destination schemas that actually have the word loop in them, right? So you could browse through this, because as you move things from page to page, your map is sort of split in different pages, right? So that sort of concludes my demo. There are a few other features that I have not demoed, but this is the highlight of the kind of thinking around this. What does this mean? This is not, this is a real world problem. This is not something that was easy to crack. We actually had to do a lot of usability study, work with, there was a significant MSR project, Microsoft research project. We had some senior researchers come and look into this, and as part of that collaboration effort, we made this. There's more to go here. So this is what we are doing for next year. Going forward, you can think of it more like semantic mapping. I want to be able to know, given two schemas, what are the kind of elements that map to each other, right? Give some hints based on usage. So there's a lot of work here. But we do think that transformation is very key for BizTalk and integration space, right? So thank you. Let me go back to my, is it A or B? A, okay. Okay. So a little preview, a little recap of what we saw. I want to remind you, the demo guides were with us today. It was a preview of a build from the main source tree last week. I just picked it up before I left. So it's as most of you guys are developers, BBTs were, struggling, and we just picked the right build. It worked. So it's pre-beta, right? So, but this is part of our committed plan for next year. You also saw the Visual Studio 2010 integration, because that's what it was hosted in. And then, of course, the rest of the stuff, making it usable so that it reduces clutter. You have a thing called the relevance tree, auto scroll of the surfaces, and you can move to page or search, right? At the end of the day, this should significantly, folks who internally looked at it, who built big maps, significantly reduce the amount of investment it takes to build a map, right? Thank you. Okay, so now a recap of the roadmap as we fill the middle piece, which is we will ship BizTalk Server 2009 R2 next year, and the primary themes around it are platform support for Visual Studio 2010, SQL Server 2008 R2, and Windows Server 2008 R2. Productivity improvements primarily in manageability and out-of-box functionality, such as in RFID, and B2B scenarios made easy, such as the enhancements in Mapper. We will also ship the BizTalk Server 2006 R2 SP1 in the early part of next year, right? So as I draw the roadmap, I want to reiterating the fact that we will continue to support our current customers by shipping software patches at an appropriate time. Okay. So what next? So I do have another blank space. What next, right? So as we think through this, we I talked about a sort of technology disruptors that are at play, and there are also some longer-standing issues, architectural issues that we have to address, such as low latency, right? And as we look to the future, we are going to build on the app fabric, right? We are going to make sure that BizTalk server brings integration to app fabric and utilizes the scale, manageability, and multi-tenancy, and the server service symmetry in the app fabric. Right? So I'll discuss more details if you think some of this is jargon. So what's the future look like? You heard about the app fabric. What it gives you is primarily scale, and an elastic scale too. In a sense, you are able to build it, and you can add boxes, racks as you go. It gives you manageability of these boxes and the manageability of the entire app model overall, right, from development all the way into deployment and then management at scale. It also makes sure that there is the server service. You can build this in a fashion where you can be used in a server as well as in the service, right? And what we want to do is make sure that BizTalk server utilizes all of this, because these are long-standing asks from BizTalk customers, so that when you build this on top of the app fabric, when you power it by the app fabric, you get all of these features. Right? So what is BizTalk going to focus on? It's not different from what it is focusing on today. So I get this question often. What is the true kind of core value prop for BizTalk? It is what I said right in the beginning. It helps you to connect to line of business systems and mainframe systems on one side. It helps you to react, your application to react to events from various data sources, help you connect with business to business transactions with trading partners, and helps you also connect to sensor devices like RFID, right? So it still continues to be the integration server for Microsoft, but it's built in a fashion which actually extends the set of functionalities and abilities that it provides today. The other question that folks have is, what does this mean for current investments? We will, such as specifically Xlang, right? We will absolutely continue to support everything that we've built, right? So we'll take it forward. We also want to make sure that we expand this so that we can actually take advantage of the new paradigms that are coming up. So at a high level, building BizTalk on top of App Fabric gives you three things. First, it gives enterprise connectivity for applications that are built on App Fabric. I'll show you a demo, but you can build it a little later. But you can build a .NET app, and you can actually easily make it connect to a line of business system. It also helps. BizTalk can be used to help connect with the cloud. So there are various ways to think about the cloud. In the case of integration, you want to be able to connect the premise server to the cloud app, a cloud servers to a line of business system on your premise. Those are two clear ones. And then you may also want to run some business-to-business services like a transformation in the cloud, right? There are lots of networks today where you can actually, they're proprietary networks, but you can think of some of them, actually you can host it in the cloud, and you can have a transformation service there, right, for smaller businesses to interact with each other. Finally, we will invest in making sure that we have a deeper platform alignment, such as workflow, such as scalability and manageability, or the app model that BizTalk has will be something that you can actually build a .NET app and scale it up to, right, as an integration app. So that's the high-level sort of direction that we will take, right? And I want to kind of show a demo. And before I go into the demo, I kind of set the context. This is a preview of a prototype. So I'm paying more for the the earlier one was last week's build. This one's a prototype. But that said, I do want to share some of the early thinking around this and what we built, right? This feature, specifically the notion of a workflow service and interacting with the BizTalk in a deep fashion, is something that's a huge ask, because it brings with it an alignment with the .NET platform. It brings with it an ability to do low latency messaging, a lot of features that customers ask for, right? I also want to set the context for what the demo is. The demo is actually something that we took from one of our customers who actually who does airline bookings, right, using BizTalk. So we've simplified that scenario. No, that's not a scenario I can demo right now, not in this kind of an environment. To be a couple of queries. One is a query service, which actually I can book a cab, a hotel, or a flight, or and a book service. So basically, I can either query for availability or I can book them. And there are two different kind of paradigms. A query is something that you can have non-durable messaging, but low latency because there is actually a person sitting on the other end of the browser waiting for a response. And a booking service, is probably something that can take a little longer because the user is used to a little longer time. Plus, it needs to be non-repudiable or durable, right? So, so it's a good kind of a scenario to think about when you see these things play in a mixed fashion. So before I go there, I want to actually show you a couple things. Start up Visual Studio. So what is the development environment going to look like? So I say new project, Bevel project, sorry, BizTalk project. Did I click Bevel or BizTalk? Okay. So, okay, Solution Explorer. There you go. So I can do add, new item. There you have it. You can add a workflow. And double click it. And it would add a workflow. So as you see, there's a XAML in there. And the workflow showing up. Yep. This is the same workflow designer that ships as part of Visual Studio. So what it hosts exactly the same environment, right? So much so you can actually go to the toolbox, and you get the exact same set of activities that you would find in a workflow designer, right? So this is this brings the workflow designer and all of the workflow development activities to the BizTalk environment. Okay. The particular view that I have here is what's called a sequential view. There are other views that are there in workflow, such as the flowchart or state machine. You can get those as well. So anything that you can do in a workflow designer, you can do right here inside because it's the same thing. So let's go back to one that sort of built. And I wanted to show a couple of things. This is my PDC scenario. And as I build this, you can see that there are several XAMLs, which is the workflow persisted format for workflow. And they are along with other normal BizTalk artifacts such as BTM, right? So you can have your workflows, you can have your Xlang orchestrations, you can have your maps and your pipelines, right? All as part of this same project, right? So this is what I mean by this just extends the overall scope of BizTalk. It doesn't change it radically. Now let's do a simple, let me create a map. I wanted to show, no, sorry, here. Add new item. Good. Before I build the map out, I wanted to talk a little bit. So we talked about what does BizTalk bring for, we talked about what does workflow bring for BizTalk developers. What does BizTalk bring for workflow developers, the people who are using .NET programming, right? One, you can connect to line of business systems. That's a given, right? But you also think about it, the core part of integration, as I said, is map, right? Folks who have been in the integration space, such as me, we're very commonly used to these XSD schemas, and we know how to play with them. But programmers, they are used to more like .NET objects. So Would you want to map them? Absolutely, because many of these actually get translated into .NET objects in your programming environment. So, and how we surface them out is a data contract. So if you look, you can select a data contract. I just go through a cab data contract. It has 4 or 5 elements in there, and I could pick a schema or a data contract. So I could map from one to the other. In this case, I'm going to map from a data contract to a data contract. Okay. And it's a legacy request, and you can actually just drag and drop, and as usual, you could add functoids in the middle. You could do all the magic that you could do the mapper, and if it were a large data contract, just like a large schema, all of the features that I showed would just show up here as well. Right? So what this does is actually bridges the gap so that it doesn't matter which kind of environment that you're working in, you are able to build integration applications really easily. Okay? Now let me go back to my, so I can actually save it. Okay. Now I go back to my Solution Explorer. Guess what? There's my map that I just created. I can just, with a click, create a workflow activity for this. Thank you. I'm easy to please. No. So what does this mean? You basically created a map in a visual environment, and you generated the workflow activity for it. Now it's just a code activity that you can use anywhere in your application, in your workflow application, right? So you could actually go to which one? Red Airways booking service. I think. You could just drag and drop it, and it'll be there. So for instance, you could just go here. Oh, sorry, I have to build it first. You're right. No wonder it didn't show up. So let me build it. Build succeeded, except it's not returning. Okay, there you go. There you go. You have your map 1 transform activity. Of course, I could have named it a little more intuitive. I just drag and drop it right here. I can actually go to properties, and I can configure the parameter in and parameter out with IntelliSense that was built in, that was showed in the previous talk. So sort of ties the entire mapping and transformation experience into the .NET development experience. Okay. Let's go back to the last one, the last demo that I have. Sorry. Okay. So here's the full built-out customer portal app that we have, right? So as you see, where is the references? No. Where's the XAMLs? Yeah, okay, there you go. So those are all the workflows that we used, right? And there's some code in there as well. So essentially, this is what a fully built-out mini demo scenario, mini request response scenario looks like. Let's go to the portal. So this is a portal that we built for making a airline reservation, and you could just do a query saying I want to go to PDC, I want to leave on 19th from New York to LA, and come back on 24th. I search, and I get a bunch of options for flight, return trip, cabs, and I just basically say book it, right? So if you notice, the query was a lot faster than the booking, simply because the query actually goes through a direct connection to workflow service. It doesn't go via the message box, right? So so in essence, what is built is the low latency, right? So we directly connect to the running workflow service, and get the responses back. So when you make the booking, you go through the process. How did we get there? I skipped a part of the previous demo that I will actually go back and show you, which is here. I could say deploy in the previous demo. Out comes this UI. This UI is clearly prototype. This is not going to be the way it looks, but at the same time, the functionality is what I want to talk about, right? So when you bring up the ability to deploy, you want to be able to say, which host do I want to deploy it in? What are the receive endpoints? What are the send endpoints? What are the properties of each of these endpoints, right? So the experience for that would look somewhat like this. For each of the 3 workflow services that we talked about, the booking for Airways, cab, and another Airways. So there are 3 of these services. You could actually choose which host it runs in. And here there's only one host. And then you go to the next. Oops. Okay. Let me rebuild this. So while it works on that, I'll talk about the experience. So essentially, you would be able to go and talk about each of the receive points and say, is it durable? If it is durable, I want to make sure that it goes through the message box and I actually track it. If it's not durable, then I actually directly connect, and I don't care about the recording of that or tracking of that particular interaction. I also want to know whether I should use the client transaction or not, because many of the cases you actually client passes in a transaction ID and you want to make sure that you're part of the same transaction. Third thing that you want to do is about scale out. Do I want this particular receive endpoint to run in my service, or should it run somewhere else, right? So why would you want to do that? If you actually scale out or farm out your connects or the receive endpoints, then they would be on a different machine, and the load on this machine is affinitized to only servicing the request, right? Let me try and give it one more shot, but if it doesn't work, as I said, it's a prototype. Deploy. No. So I think what we will do is we will clean this up and we'll have it ready in the booth. We can show there. Okay. Let's go back to. Yeah. So what did you see? So workflow support for BizTalk development and experience. So you get all the different ways of building workflows. You get all the enhancements that you get in the .NET and integration with the Visual Studio and WCF stack. It was hosted in BizTalk server, so it's a familiar environment for you. And then for .NET developers, you get all the capabilities in terms of ability to use a map as just a workflow activity, and you can do transformation from one data contract to the other. With the integration with the rest of App Fabric, by nature you're getting a bunch of features that we've been asking for a long time as customers, right? So one of them is low latency. The other one is ease of deployment and manageability and scale, right? Ability to manage at scale. So I wanted to, since we are running out of time, I wanted to kind of quickly go through the rest of the roadmap. So beyond 2010, our thought process is around, of course, we will innovate in integration and B2B, right? We will continue to make it easier, but we will also make sure that the enterprise connectivity is something that we bring to all App Fabric apps, right? And then we'll have deeper platform alignment with things like workflow and the rest of the application fabric, cache, hosting, things of that sort. And finally, we will also make sure that the things that, with the cloud rising in terms of importance, you want to make sure that you can connect to the cloud or from the cloud and have specific services that you can actually host in the cloud. Takeaways. No surprises here. Microsoft continues to invest in BizTalk, and BizTalk is Microsoft integration server. We have a strong roadmap ahead, both in terms of what we're doing in 2010 and beyond, and we will make it better together in terms of working with the investments that we're making in App Fabric so that we can bring all of those innovations to BizTalk scenarios and customers. And the one ask I have for you is continue to build your integration solutions using BizTalk. Right? Cool. Thank you. There are a few additional sessions. I also put in the sessions that have already happened because these decks will be shared out. There are quite a few sessions on workflow and scale and App Fabric. So please go attend all the ones that are appealing to you. And please do fill up. I don't have the slide for that, but please do fill up the forms. Time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please. It's a good time to ask. Yeah. OK, quick question. Polling interval for the host today set on the group. Is it still on the host on the group? Very likely not. So it's not a committed feature, but it's something that we are definitely looking into. OK, so I won't make a commitment unless, yeah. OK. So we've had this request from several other folks. OK, so I just talked to a customer last week as well. So, yeah. Yeah, so 2006 R2 SP1. I can go into details offline, but basically there are not too many features. What they are sort of simple enhancements, roll up of the fixes, keeping up with the standards, and some manageability improvements. Yeah, HIPAA and HL7. HIPAA 5010 support. It's going to be soon available on 2009.
2009, but not 2006.
Not as far as I know, yes. Okay. Yep. Sure. Pardon? Support for cloud adapters. None that's planned as part of 2009 R2. We're definitely looking at it post 2009 R2, but none that's planned. So.
Quick question.
Yes.
When we moved from Visual Studio 2005 to 2008, right, the solutions build doesn't work for 2006. It's not 2006. We cannot compile solutions in 2008. So moving forward in BizTalk 2009 R2 that you're talking about, would it be compatible with Visual Studio 2008 or not?
So let me rephrase the question. When I move from Visual Studio 2008 to 2010, will I have to rebuild? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I had to get back to you on that. Actually, don't know. I don't want to make a commitment here that I haven't checked back with the folks. Tapas, do you know? It should not be, but I don't.
When we moved from
Yeah. So this should be a lot smoother migration. But that said, I don't want to make a statement here. Yeah.
Understanding that you are continuing to invest in the old Xlang type of processes. Also, are you considering tooling to move Xlang processes to workflow processes later on?
Question is, are we looking at moving Xlang into workflow, right, in terms of processes? Yeah, we're looking into it, but to be very clear, these kinds of changes are tough. You guys, even if I were to do it, to take a dehydrated instance and kind of transform it into something else is not something I'd recommend. But that said, we're definitely looking at tooling, helping with how to migrate from one to the other. That said, you could continue to run with Xlang forever, something that we will absolutely support. Right? It will be integral part of the product. OK. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yep. You got two already. Can you go one before? That's all right.
Talking about the adapters, is there any plans to have adapters to Oracle Business Suite?
The question is, is there a plan to have an adapter to Oracle eBusiness Suite? There is no plan because we already have one.
For a business? Because as far as I know, there's only for Oracle database.
So we should take this offline. So we shipped a WCF-based adapter for Oracle eBusiness Suites as part of 2009 and as part of BizTalk Adapter Pack 2.0.
Thank you.
So we should talk offline. If there are certain set of features that are missing, we should talk. But we do have an adapter. That's part of the product.
Okay, we'll check it out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. This is an organizational question. I have nothing to say on that. I mean, see, why is BizTalk part of this sort of a bigger business platform division? Is because we think that SQL, BizTalk, App Fabric, they're all about enterprise customers, the kind of developers you folks are, and the kind of customers that you write code to, right? So that's the way to think through this, not in terms of product alignment. We will look through that, but at the same time, there's nothing that I can talk to about right now. Okay. Cool. Question though. Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. In my workflow example, who's the host? In this particular example, BizTalk was the host. It was bts ntsvc.exe. Okay. Now, pardon? Yeah. The future, I actually think that the longer term future, it will absolutely be App Fabric the host. Make no mistake, right? Everything, including workflow, Xlang, everything will run in the App Fabric because that's where you get the scale and manageability story, right? How we get there is something that we have to figure out in terms of do we go through one step, multiple steps, something that we will talk to. Okay, so.
Would be the next question. When you move to doubles from the point of view of the workflow, where are you going to attach the pipeline from the architecture point of view? For listing and pointing shape or the inside?
Okay. We should take this offline. This question definitely, I mean, there's a certain set of folks here we can talk to. So the question was, when we move to the App Fabric-based host, would we attach the pipeline before the listener or after the listener? Good question. We actually have thoughts on this, but not at the level that I can talk to here. We can definitely take it offline and we can share. So there are some tough technology problems in this space, but we think we actually have a handle on it, and we also are very committed to it. So I do believe that the next talk's going to start, so we should kind of leave. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here.